Have you ever been home alone during a storm? The rain hitting the window, the thunder lighting up the sky. But what's really scary isn't outside. It's inside the house. Have you ever felt that feeling of being watched, of hearing footsteps when there shouldn't be anyone there? This story is real, and what happened to her could happen to any of us. But can you bear to listen until the end? If you think you've heard scary stories before, brace yourself. This one will make you think twice before turning out the lights. Night fell heavily, engulfing the city in almost absolute pitch black. Outside, the storm raged mercilessly. The rain tapped against the windows like insistent fingers trying to get in. The wind whistled through the cracks in the door, as if whispering forbidden secrets. Lightning ripped across the sky, releasing sudden flashes that illuminated the living room of the house for fractions of a second. Anna was alone. His parents had traveled for a last-minute appointment, and his older brother had decided to spend the night at a friend's house. She liked being alone, or at least that's what she thought, until that night. On the sofa, hugged by a blanket, Anna tried to distract herself by watching TV, but the signal wavered every time thunder exploded in the distance. The feeling of isolation grew. The clock showed 11:47 p.m., and the night seemed longer and longer. That's when he heard it, a muffled sound, a crack from the hallway, as if someone had stepped on the wooden floor. Anna's heart accelerated. Holding her breath, she paused the TV and fell silent. The only sound now was the storm outside. Maybe it was just the house settling or the wind, but something inside her said no. She tried to ignore it. She turned the TV back on, turned up the volume, and tried to convince herself that she was just nervous. But then, another noise. This time closer. Something was inside the house, and Anna was no longer alone. The air inside the house seemed to have become heavier. It was as if an invisible presence filled the space around Anna, making her skin crawl. She tried to convince herself that it was just imagination, an effect of the storm and loneliness. But deep down, something told her that she wasn't alone. She took out her cell phone and looked at the screen. No signal. The storm must have knocked out the connection. The Wi-Fi didn't work either. Now, any sense of security she had before was gone. Taking a deep breath, he decided to get up. He walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water, trying to calm his nerves. Every step he took echoed softly on the wooden floor. The silence inside the house was deafening, broken only by the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. When he opened the refrigerator, cold light illuminated the room. That's when she felt it, a presence. It was as if someone was standing right behind her, watching her every move. His heart raced. An icy shiver ran down his spine. With wide eyes, she slowly turned her head back. But there was nothing. At least, not that he could see. Ishna held the glass tightly. His breathing was uneven, and the silence in the house now seemed more ominous than ever. She knew something was wrong. Slowly closing the fridge, he tried to convince himself that everything was just a figment of his imagination. But then he heard it, a low, shuffling noise coming from the hallway. His heart almost stopped. It was as if something was being pulled through the floor. The sound was subtle, but there was no doubt it was coming from inside the house. She stood still, her senses heightened. Maybe it was just the wind, old wood creaking with humidity. She forced a nervous smile, trying to calm herself. But before he could convince himself, the sound came again. Now it was a whisper, low, hoarse, unintelligible. Anna froze. The voice seemed to be coming from the living room, a space that, as far as she knew, was completely empty. What terrified her most was not the sound itself, but the certainty that there shouldn't be anyone there. His first instinct was to run to his room and lock himself. But what if someone had entered the house? The thought of being watched made her skin crawl. She needed to check. With slow, cautious steps, he advanced down the corridor. The floor creaked slightly beneath her feet, and her breathing was heavy. Silence returned for a brief moment. Just the insistent rain beating on the window. So when he arrived in the room, the lamp fell over by itself. The shock was immediate. The sound of the impact echoed through the house, and Anna jumped back, stifling a scream. His chest rose and fell rapidly. That couldn't just be the wind. His eyes swept the room. Nothing, no sign of movement. But in the dark corner of the room, where the light couldn't reach, she felt it. A presence. The same cold creeping up your spine, the same instinct screaming inside her. She was not alone. Anna felt her heart beating so hard that she was sure the sound was echoing through the silence of the house. The lamp lying on the floor was still shaking slightly, as if something invisible had just touched it. But what was worse? The absolute silence that followed. She took a step back, her mouth dry, her breath short. I tried to find a logical explanation, but everything about it screamed otherwise. The room seemed frozen in time, as if the air itself was thicker, suffocating. There was something wrong, very wrong. She needed to get out of there. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe it was just a trick of the mind. He needed to go to his room, lock himself in and try to sleep. But it was when he turned his body towards the corridor that he realized. The bedroom door was ajar. Her stomach immediately dropped. She was absolutely certain that she had left that door closed. It always closed before going to sleep. Always. Since I was a child, I had the habit of keeping doors locked. Something about the darkness of the hallway always made her uncomfortable. But now, she didn't remember opening it. The hallway was dark, and the small crack in the half-open door seemed to widen even more as his eyes tried to adjust. The darkness inside the room seemed thicker, as if something was there, waiting. Inna didn't move. He just stood there, his body rigid, trying to process what he was seeing. Maybe the wind had pushed the door open. No, there was no wind inside the house. Maybe I forgot to close it properly. But it wasn't possible. His heart was now beating out of control. The hallway seemed longer, colder. The sound of rain outside became distant, muffled, as if time had stopped. Then the door opened a little wider. Alone. No wind. No explanation. Anna felt a wave of dread run up her spine. Something was there, and he knew she was watching. Anna couldn't move. His entire body screamed to run, to get out of there as quickly as possible, but his legs were rooted to the ground, as if they were bound by invisible chains. The bedroom door was now more open, but that wasn't the worst. It was the unbearable feeling that someone was watching her. His instinct told him not to look into the room, not to pay attention to whatever was there. But every fiber of his body knew there was something in the darkness. Something that shouldn't be there. She took a deep breath, trying to regain control. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe it was all just a figment of your imagination. Perhaps. With hesitant steps, Anna decided to retreat. His feet touched the wooden floor with an almost imperceptible creak. She swallowed hard and turned slowly towards the living room. The dim light from the fallen lamp still flickered in the corner of the room, and that's when she saw it. The carpet was turned over, pillows were thrown on the floor, and the scariest thing, the front door was unlocked. His chest tightened in pure despair. She was sure she had locked that door. It was an automatic habit. Arrive home, turn the key twice, pull the handle to make sure it is securely closed. But now, the doorknob was slightly turned, as if someone had just tried to open it. Inna felt a wave of adrenaline course through her body. Did someone enter the house? She looked around, trying to find signs of intrusion, but the windows were closed. No broken glass, no sound of footsteps other than your own. Just the overwhelming silence and the storm outside, punishing the night. The room felt normal, but strangely wrong. And it was then that his eyes fell on something that shouldn't be there. A wet footprint on the floor. The format was sharp, big, human, but it wasn't hers. Anna felt her stomach turn. Someone was there, or worse, still was. The living room was suddenly suffocating. The only thing that moved was the curtain, swaying slightly with the draft that shouldn't be there. And then, the sound. A creak, there in the hallway, behind her. The bedroom door was opening once again. Anna's heart was pounding so hard that she could feel the blood pulsing in her ears. The feeling that something was wrong became unbearable. It was as if the air inside the house had become heavy, dense, impossible to breathe. She wanted to believe that it was all a mistake, that his tired mind was playing tricks. But then, his eyes returned to that wet footprint on the floor. She was not alone. Thunder boomed outside, lighting up the room for an instant. The flash made the shadows tremble, dancing in distorted shapes across the walls. Anna instinctively lynched. She needed to do something. I needed to get out of there, but where to run? If someone was inside the house, going to the front door might be exactly what that thing was hoping for. His gaze moved to the living room window. Maybe he could look outside, yell for help, see if any neighbors were awake. She didn't want to admit it, but she needed to make sure nothing was lurking. Moving slowly, each step echoing in her ears like a rumble, Anna went to the window. The storm raged on the dark streets outside. Water ran down the glass, forming shiny veins on the soggy surface. She strained her eyes to see beyond the rain. Nothing but darkness. No lights on in the neighboring houses. No living souls walking outside. It was as if the whole world was asleep. Except her. Then it happened. Something moved in the glass. Not outside, behind her. The reflection appeared so quickly that she almost couldn't react. But for a split second, Anna clearly saw the shape of someone standing in the middle of the room, high. Property, just looking at her. Her eyes widened, panic taking over her body. He turned around in a sudden movement. Nothing. The room was empty. His chest rose and fell frantically, each breath short and desperate. His hands were shaking. She knew what she had seen. There was someone there, or still was. Anna swallowed dryly. The thought of looking into the glass again was terrifying, but she needed to be sure. Turning slowly, his gaze returned to the window. And then, the instant his eyes met the reflection, she saw. This time, it was closer. Much closer. The air around. Anna seemed heavy like an invisible, suffocating wave. His lungs burned with each short, panicked breath. Whatever was there was playing with her. His entire body shook as his gaze remained fixed on the window glass. The reflection, that thing, was closer, but when she turned around, there was nothing. Her heart was pounding so loudly that she could hear it in the silence. The only thing that broke the darkness was the storm outside, and even then, it seemed as if the sound of the rain was distant, muffled, as if the entire world was moving away. She needed to do something. He took out his cell phone. His hands were shaking so much that he almost dropped him. He unlocked the screen in desperation. No signal. Anna blinked, trying to see straight. It couldn't be. He looked at the corner of the screen. No signal bars, no Wi-Fi connection, no chance to ask for help. It was as if the house was isolated. The throat became dry. Your fingers raced to the messaging app, tried to send something, anything. The text froze on the screen without delivery confirmation. Anna felt a wave of despair rise within her. She was completely alone. And then the lights started to flicker. The yellow glow from the lamp flickered, bathing the room in frantic flashes of light and darkness. Every time the lights went out, his chest tightened. The sound of the electrical switch clicking was too loud, as if someone was messing with the wiring. Anna held her cell phone tightly, as if it were her only connection to the real world. She needed to get out of there. The flashing of lights accelerated, faster and faster. Flash, darkness, flash, darkness. And then, one last flash. The lamp exploded. The dry crack echoed through the house and Anna flinched. The glass shattered across the floor. Darkness took over everything. Anna remained motionless. His ears tried to pick up any sound other than the storm. Fear crept inside her, cold, suffocating. Then, in absolute silence, a whisper. Low, dragged, behind her. Anna was not alone. Anna's heart seemed to stop for a moment. That whisper, low, harsh, almost a scratchy murmur, couldn't be a mistake in his mind. The room was completely dark now. The only light came from the lightning that streaked across the sky outside, creating distorted shadows that danced across the walls of the room. She held her breath. The sound came again. Anna. It was a whisper. Faint, but sharp enough to make your blood run cold. She felt her skin crawl, every nerve in her body alert, as if something invisible was crawling around her. The voice came from the hallway, and at the end of that hallway was her room. His first impulse was to run away, to escape that house, that infernal night. But his legs didn't move. A new bolt of lightning ripped through the sky. In that brief, illuminated moment, Anna saw it. The bedroom door, which she was absolutely sure she had closed before coming downstairs, was ajar, and there was something beyond the darkness inside, something that moved. The flash went out. The room returned to being a black hole at the end of the corridor. Anna felt her chest heave. This can't be happening, he murmured, almost voiceless, but then the voice whispered again, this time closer. Anna, come here. It was impossible. That voice, it was his mother's voice. Anna was paralyzed. His mother wasn't there. His mother had died 3 years ago. She couldn't be there, but the voice sounded the same. Identical. Anna. The hallway lamp flickered, casting a silhouette on the bedroom door. Small, skinny, but wrong. Something was calling to her, something that used his mother's voice. Anna felt a chill run up her spine. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but then the door creaked and it started to open, alone. Anna felt a lump tighten in her throat. The whisper still echoed in his mind, that impossible voice, that soft, familiar tone, but distorted, wrong. The bedroom door was now wide open. The darkness inside seemed thicker than it should be, as if it was sucking in the little light from the hallway. His heart hammered in his chest. She wanted to run, but it was like she was pinned to the ground. Then new thunder shook the house, and in the next flash, Anna saw it. The wardrobe. His door was ajar, but it wasn't just that. There was something inside him, something that moved as the lightning filled the room. Anna let out a shaky breath and took a hesitant step. Instinct told him to run, but the voice calling his name, it was his mother's voice. I needed to be sure. Every step I took felt like I was missing, as if the ground was further away than it should have been. The sound of the storm outside drowned out the noise in the house, but she felt it. I felt like I wasn't alone. When he reached the bedroom door, the light flickered once more. The wardrobe door slowly opened, creaking as if something was coming out of it. Anna smelled it first, a smell of damp wood, dust, and something stronger, something rotten. The lamp blinked again, and that's when she saw it. Inside the wardrobe, between the shadows, 2 eyes watched her. They glowed in the darkness, small, deep, sick, mouth dry, breathing ragged. The thing was inside, but it wasn't an animal. It was a face, his mother's face, just wrong. The smile was too wide, the teeth pointed, the skin stretched as if it were a thin mask over sharp bones, and then he moved. The creaking of the door was the last thing Anna heard before the hallway lamp exploded. The room was plunged into total darkness, and a low, wet whisper echoed beside him. "Daughter, did you miss me?" The darkness of the room swallowed everything. Anna was paralyzed. The blood ran cold in his veins. She wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come out. The only thing he heard was his own shaky breathing and the noise of the storm roaring outside. Then a low crack broke the silence, the sound of something moving slowly, the subtle creak of the wardrobe's wood, and that whisper again. "Daughter, did you miss me?" The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Inna stumbled backwards, trying to get away. His feet dragged on the cold floor, and the lack of light made it impossible to see anything. His heart was beating wildly, hammering against his chest as if it were going to explode, and that's when she saw it. A flash, the bathroom light turned on by itself. The bathroom door was ajar, revealing only the mirror on the cabinet above the sink. The surface appeared blurry, covered in a thick fog. Anna knew that didn't make sense. She hadn't showered. There was no steam in the air, but there was something there. Something written on the mirror glass. Every step towards the bathroom felt like an eternity. She wanted to run away. She wanted to run out the front door and never look back, but something was pulling her there. When he reached the bathroom door, he held the side of the door frame, trying to stop the shaking of his hands. And then she saw it. Words. Long, shaky sentences, as if someone had written them with their fingers on a damp surface. His eyes were forced to scan the message, letter by letter, slowly forming a terrifying sentence. "It's not your mother. Don't look at her." Ina's stomach turned inside out. She took a step back, panting. His head was spinning, his knees were shaking. But before he could process it, another sentence began to form, as if someone invisible was still writing. Slowly, more letters emerged. "If she talks to you, run!" Anna swallowed. A shiver ran up his spine. And then a sound behind her, low, wet. A panting breath and a cold touch on the shoulder. Anna gritted her teeth and closed her eyes tightly. The mirror shook slightly, as if something was pressing on the surface from within. She smelled a rotten smell, and then the whisper returned, low, hoarse, too close. "Daughter, why don't you answer me?" The air around Anna became thick, filled with something she couldn't explain. The putrid smell intensified, invading his nostrils, turning his stomach. She didn't dare turn around. I couldn't. His feet were embedded in the cold ground, as if invisible roots had wrapped themselves around his legs. Her heart pounded in her chest, to the point where she felt her own pulse throbbing in her ears. The mirror in front of him shook again. The words scrawled on the surface seemed to fade away, as if they were absorbed into the glass, slowly disappearing, until there was nothing left. And then the sound, one step behind her, low, dragged, as if something had moved right next to the back of his neck. Anna held her breath. His entire body was on alert. She knew she wasn't alone in that bathroom. Something or someone was there, and that expected her to turn around. Time seemed to have frozen. The only thing that moved was the cold creeping up her spine, an uncomfortable shiver that tingled beneath. Her skin, her eyes were fixed on the mirror, even though it now only reflected the darkness behind her. But then, the breath, low, quick, almost in your ear. Anna felt the light touch of something cold touching her hair, like fingers. Cold, cadaverous. She wanted to run. She needed to run, but I couldn't. Instinct screamed inside her, "Don't look back! Don't look back!" But then the whisper returned, low, hoarse. "On the right side of your face, I know you can hear me." Anna felt the air escape from her lungs. His eyes widened, and then another step. this time closer. So close that she could feel the heat of something that shouldn't even be alive. The bathroom light flickered violently, casting warped shadows on the walls, and then the reflection appeared in the mirror, right behind her. Something impossible. Something that shouldn't be there. The dark, wrinkled skin, the deep black eyes like an endless well, the mouth too open, and a wide, distorted, abnormal smile. Anna opened her mouth to scream, but too late. The thing raised its skeletal hand and grabbed his shoulder tightly. Anna was paralyzed. The cold touch on his shoulder made his body twitch automatically. She felt the pressure of the hand that seemed to have no life, but somehow still held her tightly, as if trying to immobilize her, control her. With each passing second, the feeling of claustrophobia intensified, and the fear that gripped her was cold and crushing. His heart beat wildly, trying to escape from his chest, but she knew she couldn't move. His muscles were too tense, and his mind was on the verge of collapse. The air around her seemed saturated with a presence that shouldn't be there, that shouldn't exist. Suddenly, the voice echoed again. Dwarf! The sound was dull and distant, but at the same time so close. It seemed like she was hearing her own voice, but in a strange, disfigured way, as if it weren't hers, but someone or something else's. Anna stood frozen, with her eyes fixed on the mirror in front of her. The reflection of his own face seemed to distort more and more, the features of his face beginning to stretch and distort into something strange, almost monstrous. Dwarf. Now the voice was clearer, more real. And what terrified her most was the fact that she couldn't identify where it came from. It was as if she were inside her, all around her, being called by something that knew exactly who she was. The shiver running up her spine seemed to feed something bigger, something that was smiling, waiting to see her panic. The shadow behind her approached. Anna felt that it was no longer just fear that dominated her, but rather the certainty that something was with her, watching her every movement, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. With each passing second, she felt her body becoming heavier, as if an invisible pressure was crushing her strength, trying to take away her freedom of action. She didn't want to look back, but curiosity mixed with fear pushed her towards the abyss. But she couldn't. It shouldn't have. She was about to lose her mind, the voice in her head whispering her name like a spell, an irresistible command that held her tighter and tighter. Suddenly, a dark image appeared at the bathroom door, quickly passing through the crack of the entrance. It was loud, slow, and distant, but Anna felt the presence of something deadly close. And before she could process it, her name was called again. But this time, it was louder. It was as if the voice was inside one's own mind, coming from all sides, as if the entire universe was trying to communicate it. Dwarf! The sound dragged on, with an unsustainable force. She couldn't resist. The sensation was overwhelming, and the terror made her think that nothing else mattered, that nothing was real anymore. Every piece of her sanity was being ripped away, shattered. And as she looked into the mirror one last time, a familiar figure appeared behind her. Her own eyes, but they weren't her eyes. The shadow approached, and for the first time, she saw that thing clearly. It was her, but it wasn't. She was being called by something that she didn't even recognize anymore. Anna tried to move away from the mirror, her mind now in complete confusion, but something inside her told her not to turn away. The voice, still repeating her name, became a distant echo, but the feeling that she was not alone never left her mind. Something was there, with her, and it wasn't human. A dark presence hovered in the house. When she looked to the side, something strange happened. In the center of the room, the wall clock, one of those old wooden clocks with Roman numerals that had always been in the family home, began to swing gently. Anna stopped and fixed her eyes on him, seeing him sway left and right, as if he had a life of his own, defying any logical explanation. Nothing touched him, but he moved. Anna felt her breath catch in her throat, as if she were being swallowed by an invisible force. The clock's movement seemed more erratic, more desperate, as if it was trying to escape something that was approaching. But the surprise came in the next instant. Suddenly, the clock stopped completely, but it wasn't the only object that moved. A chair next to the dining table, which had been empty and completely silent since Anna entered the room, began to move slowly. It was not a smooth movement. It was not a simple swing caused by a wind. The chair slowly slid back, as if an invisible hand was tugging at it, forcing it away from the table. Anna approached, her feet now feeling heavy, as if they were sinking into the ground, and with a feeling of ice rising up her spine. Her eyes were fixed on the chair, but what made her stop breathing was the sound, an almost imperceptible sound, but one she heard. Clearly, a whisper. It was as if the chair had whispered to her, a warning, an invitation, or perhaps a threat. "Come closer." She backed away instinctively, her feet retreating as if the ground was turning into something solid and icy. But no matter how much she wanted to run away, objects continued to move around him. The clock, still stopped, seemed to be waiting for something. The lamp on the coffee table began to flicker, its light flickering at increasingly rapid intervals until the lamp finally went out. The atmosphere in the house was increasingly dense. Anna didn't know what was happening, but she felt like something was trying to communicate with her, or perhaps he was trying to warn her of something she didn't yet understand. The movement of the chair stopped abruptly, and a cold feeling took over his body. She didn't dare approach the objects that were now so far away, as if they no longer belonged to the reality she knew. The house seemed to have a life of its own, as if it had become an extension of something out of this world, something perverse. The sounds coming from the house now seemed deeper, more serious. The sound of the wind outside, which previously seemed to be just a backdrop to the storm, mixed with the sound of strange footsteps, as if something were actually moving inside the house. Fear was mixed with an immense feeling of helplessness. Anna now found herself trapped in a nightmare where time and space were distorting, and objects were no longer just inanimate things, but entities of their own, with intentions that she could not understand. That's when she heard an even louder noise coming from one of the rooms. The sound of something dragging on the floor, approaching her, as if it didn't want to be seen, but knew she was there. The chair stopped moving, but the feeling of a presence that was approaching her became even more intense. Anna felt the pressure in her chest increase. Something was there, ready to reveal itself, but she knew she wasn't ready to see what came next. And once again, she was paralyzed, not knowing whether to run or hide. The object that moved was just the beginning. The feeling of claustrophobia took over Anna's body like an unbearable pressure, squeezing her chest and making it difficult to breathe. Her eyes were fixed on everything around her, searching for some explanation. But what she saw didn't make any sense. The house, which once seemed like a safe haven for her, now felt like a prison where the walls were getting closer every second. Nothing was more reliable. The lamplight in the room flickered, still struggling to stay on. The noise of the storm outside mixed with the sound of light fighting against the darkness, as if it was trying to resist what was about to happen. The wind was blowing hard at the windows, but inside the house, everything was silent, as if the room itself was waiting. Anna slowly approached the window, as if an invisible force was guiding her. The strong wind of the storm made the glass vibrate, but at some point she felt that she was no longer alone. Something was watching her, and she couldn't escape the feeling anymore. His head was spinning, and his heartbeat sounded like a drum in his chest, so loud it seemed almost unbearable. It was then that, In the midst of that dense darkness, she heard the sound of something else. A soft crackling. Looking at the lamp, Anna's heart jumped into her throat when she realized that the light was dimming, as if an invisible force was turning it off, slowly, almost calculatedly. The sound of crackling intensified, the sound of a last breath. She took a step back, trying to get away from the dying light. But before he could react, the lamp went out completely, and total darkness took over the room. It was as if the last thread of hope had been extinguished at that very moment. The sound of the storm outside became more distant, more muffled. The silence in the house became almost oppressive, as if something was waiting for the perfect moment to attack. Anna, still in shock, tried to move to another part of the house, but the shadows surrounded her, seeming to extend further with each step she took. She heard panting, heavy breathing, but it wasn't hers. The feeling that something was there with her grew even stronger. But when she tried to look to see what it could be, she could see absolutely nothing. It was as if the darkness had taken on a life of its own, surrounding her and trapping her in some kind of nightmare. Anna's cell phone now had no signal. Even when she tried to call him again, nothing happened. The only thing she felt was the weight of thousands of invisible eyes watching her, waiting for something. And then, as if the house had taken absolute control, the last remaining light bulbs began to flicker as well, as if an evil energy was draining everything around her. What were once signs of resistance now became a clear sign that something terrible was about to happen. That was when the last light went out. At the moment the light died, Anna heard for the first time a low, dark laugh which seemed to come from everywhere. It was a laugh so deep, so macabre, that she felt the flesh on her body crawl, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. It wasn't a human laugh, but something much deeper, something that was beyond his understanding. The house was completely dark. The only sound that now filled the room was the echo of laughter. Anna knew that at that moment she was alone with something that shouldn't be there. The house, once safe, was now dead. And she too felt dead. When the silence in the house seemed complete, something that Anna could not predict happened. The scream. It was a sound so sharp and intense that it made the walls of the house shake. She froze, her entire body shuddering, as if she were being possessed by the very pain of the sound. It was as if the universe itself was screaming at her. This scream was not human. It was more like the sound of someone in agony, someone who was trapped somewhere, someone who wanted to be freed, but there was no way left. She looked around desperately, trying to understand where it was coming from. But there was no one. The house was empty, or was it? Suddenly the blinking lights came back on. One by one the lamps slowly turned on, illuminating the shadows that now seemed thicker than ever. But in the background, a silhouette began to form. It wasn't someone. Anna knew it was something much older, something much more malicious. She felt a chill run down her spine. The air became heavy and unreachable. Anna's breathing was so rapid and irregular that she could barely think clearly. The weight of what she was facing seemed to be closing in, and her only hope was to escape. But at some point she realized there was no more escape. The outcome was sealed. What she feared, what she knew would happen, finally happened. The silhouette that formed in the corner of the room smiled at her. But it wasn't a human smile. It was a distorted, almost demonic smile, as if what was there with her had fed on her anxiety, her pain. She wanted to scream, wanted to run away, but her body was in shock, trapped by the sight of what was before her. In the next instant, the dark presence took a step forward, approaching Anna with impressive speed. She felt her heart speed up, the air becoming thicker and more stuffy. The ice took his soul. All she could hear now was her own heartbeat, getting slower and slower, as if she were being absorbed by darkness. And then the air broke, with a deafening scream. A scream that was no longer from Anna, but from the house itself, from the very entity that haunted her. It was the final scream of a being that had been imprisoned within those walls for too long, and now, finally, had found a new victim. Anna, eyes wide, realized that she was no longer in control of her destiny. The house had taken her. The next moment, the lights went out for good, and everything was in total darkness. No other soul outside that place had ever known what had really happened in that house, and no one would ever return to tell the story. What happened to Anna? What was really behind that scream? Who or what was waiting for her? What did the house have to hide? The answers remain secret. Now tell me, do you have the courage to find out what happened in that place? What would have happened if you were in Anna's place? Leave your opinion in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. These stories are not for everyone, but only those who have the courage will want to know what happens in the next chapter. Don't miss it. The mystery is just beginning. Now, tell me, what if it were you in Anna's place? Would you have the courage to spend a night in that house? What really happened when the lights went out? If this story gave you goosebumps, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This helps me keep bringing you even more scary and engaging stories. And tell me here in the comments, do you believe something like this could really happen? Have you ever experienced something inexplicable? I want to know your story. See you in the next video. If you dare.